Okay, hi. I know that I'm not supposed to thank people, but I just want you to know I'm feeling thankful. Um, yes, I am afraid that the American democratic experiment is very much in jeopardy, and things have been getting worse. The reasons, I think, are myriad and complex, of course, and they involve what I refer to as top-down as well as bottom-up processes and their interaction. Top-down processes are macro, structural, or institutional, whereas bottom-up processes are more micro or social psychological, encompassing the needs, interests, and motivational concerns of individuals and social groups. On my view, these two types of processes are always intertwined. Top-down system-level characteristics shape and elicit bottom-up needs and motives, and the long-term viability of social systems depends upon their compatibility with psychological states. Or, if you prefer economic metaphors, the market for ideology is an irreducible function of elite supply and public demand, and it's clear that right-wing authoritarianism has been selling, both here and abroad. Some of the top-down institutional developments that I feel have threatened American exceptionalism, and others have mentioned many others as well, with respect to democracy include the repeal of the Fairness Doctrine in 1987, which paved the way for Fox News and much worse, Breitbart, Newsmax, etc., websites and networks that, in my view, literally created or recreated the market for US fascism. There was also the 2010 Citizens United decision that has, to a previously unimaginable degree, simply placed our democracy in the hands of billionaires, like Elon Musk. Even the decision about whom the Democratic Party should nominate as Biden's replacement, a decision that obviously had to be made, and made quickly, was not made by Democratic voters, but by a handful or two of billionaires, which may have affected buy-in. The whole situation is made worse by the fact that for decades, most Americans have been working harder than ever. Their work has been more economically productive than ever, and yet they've not been rewarded proportionately. Because of social comparison processes, rising inequality breeds distrust, anger, desperation. The decades-long assault on labor unions not only deprived many workers the ability to negotiate collectively for better terms, but also undermined any sense of employee solidarity across racial, ethnic, and cultural lines. No doubt James S. Jackson would lament these developments. There's also the Federalist Society's ruthless success in packing the courts with far-right judges, which leaves roughly half the country out in the cold, fearing the worst abuses, and unable to subscribe to the legitimacy of the American legal and political system. It becomes harder and harder for all of us to keep the faith. The so-called conservative right, it seems to me, has defected when it comes to liberal democracy, and as in a prisoner's dilemma situation, the liberal left keeps trying to cooperate and keeps losing. But they really have no other choice. At this moment in time, it's the blue states that will have to keep the flame of liberal democracy burning. And illiberal democracy is an oxymoron. Even Viktor Orban understands that. In terms of social psychology, I believe that most, if not all of this, was predictable, because the social, cognitive, and motivational differences between the liberal left and the conservative right in the US are now closely tied to the acceptance versus rejection of core democratic values and principles, such as equality versus hierarchy, progress versus tradition for the sake of tradition, civil liberty versus authority and social order, tolerance versus intolerance, diversity versus conformity, cooperation versus competition, and generalized empathy versus ostracism and victim blaming. The truth is, we've known this for a long time, although some continue to deny it. Fromm, Adorno, Allport, Lewin, Deutsch, Kelman, many of our predecessors in social science knew this because they experienced the worst of it firsthand. There can be no level playing field between the liberal left and the conservative right if one removes the institutional guardrails that enabled the American experiment to make progress. Plutocracy will always have the upper hand if the system allows it. Corruption, too, will spread and become ineradicable. And nothing in politics is easier than stirring up animosity towards outsiders, foreigners, immigrants, refugees, protesters, and intellectuals, the so-called enemy within, and blaming them, or us, for all of a country's problems. It's an old formula, but it still works because human beings haven't really changed that much in 100 years. It's easy, far too easy, to stir up feelings of uncertainty, threat, and anger, and to put forward simplistic, hateful solutions of a Manichaean nature. Obviously, we have plenty of problems to solve. The COVID pandemic could have produced an opportunity for national unity in the face of external challenges. Instead, it was used to divide us and stoke many resentments, including anti-intellectual, anti-educational, and anti-scientific resentments. The many crises posed by climate change have likewise been used to divide and conquer under the auspices of disaster capitalism and science denial. I often find it hard to sustain hope, but for the sake of my children who are here with me today, I know that we must find some bases for hope, some way of turning the cultural tide so that human beings 100 years from now will be different. Better, kinder, smarter, more inclusive, more expert, and more equipped to work together than we are now. Being here among all of you gives me hope. So thank you again for that.